Welcome to this session of the Living Your Best Life with Kidney Disease virtual forum. Thank you to Otsuka Canada and Paladin Labs for providing unrestricted financial support for this forum. Nous remercions Otsuka Canada et Laboratoire Paladin d'avoir apporté un soutien financier sans restriction à ce forum. The information presented in this virtual forum is current as of January 25th and 26th, 2022. The material shared in this presentation is not intended to be medical advice. We suggest people speak to their doctor about their own individual situation. This information is intended for a Canadian audience. Les informations présentées dans le forum virtuel sont à jour en date du 25 et 26 janvier 2022. Le matériel partagé dans cette présentation n'est pas destiné à être un avis médical. Nous suggérons aux gens de parler à leur médecin de leur situation personnelle. Cette information est destinée à un public canadien.
Hello, and welcome to the Tips and Tools for a Kidney Diet session. My name is Rosanna Mitchell, and I'm the Executive Assistant and member of the programs team for the Atlantic Branch. In this session, we are fortunate enough to have a group of skilled dietitians who will share their knowledge and about how to read food labels, understanding portion sizes, and so much more. We'll hear about the experience of one couple, Danny and Joan Rinker, who will share their experience of how diet and nutrition have helped stabilize Danny's kidney disease. Roxanne Papineau has been a clinical nephrology dietitian at the IUCPQ, Quebec Heart and Lung Institute, for almost 15 years and holds positions on a number of scientific and medical committees. Ms. Papineau has developed several educational tools for patients. She has written 3 books of recipes for kidney and heart patients. Roxanne will be sharing her part of this session in French. Unless you are a French speaker, make sure to choose the English interpretation when she is speaking and then switch back to English for the rest of the presentation. Poppy Lowe has been working on the hemodialysis unit where she lives since 2008. She has also worked with the Home-Based Therapies program. Poppy also works as a nutritional professional skills coordinator at the University of Saskatchewan's College of Pharmacy and Nutrition. Our final presenter, Linda Cerullo, has been working with patients and kidney transplants and chronic kidney disease for more than 15 years. In the area of kidney transplantation, Linda's primary emphasis has been to provide nutrition support and education during the recovery of newly transplanted kidney patients. Now I will turn the mic over to Danny and Joan, who will share their experiences with managing a kidney diet.
Am I being heard?
Yes, we can hear you.
Very good, very good. Thank you. I discovered that I had kidney disease 11 years ago when my GFR was 61%. By early 2020, that function had declined to 19. My condition was described as consistent with polycystic kidney disease. Over the years, doctors had emphasized blood pressure management, but not diet. After a 15% drop in my kidney function in 1 year, we decided we needed to take action on our own. We hired a renal dietitian, and after a lot of homework, made some radical changes to our diet. Just so you know where we started, when we began our kidney journey, we thought we were eating a very healthy one. I had and continue to have an active lifestyle, but we lacked hard facts about how to be nice to my kidneys. And that's what Joan and I are going to chat about now. We're going to tell you what we learned about first, salt and its partner potassium. Second, oxalates. 3, eating a plant-based diet. 4th, intermittent fasting. And 5th, tracking and balancing nutrient intake. Joan?
Salt. It was easy, I thought, to stay within the 2,500 milligrams of sodium recommended for most people. But somehow, when we attended Danny's first kidney disease support group and the subject of sodium came up again, I decided to check further. It turned out that some of our daily cooking ingredients were loaded with salt. For example, the soy sauce that flavored so many of our meals. 2 tablespoons of soy sauce had more than enough sodium for the whole day. My favorite bouillon cubes were even higher in sodium, and I used them almost every day in soup. As I continued to read up on sodium, I discovered that some people are actually salt sensitive. That is, their salt intake has an inordinate effect on their blood pressure. That was a turning point for me because Danny had struggled with his blood pressure for years and no medication was able to control it. Armed with this information, I went on a campaign to get the sodium out of our diet. The results were dramatic. Within days of our salt elimination regime, Danny's blood pressure was normal. Normal after 20 years of gaining and losing weight and trying one unsuccessful medication after another. I wish I could tell you that Danny's blood pressure has been 120/80 ever since, but that would be lying. Sometimes it does spike for reasons we don't completely understand. However, he has been able to reduce his medications to a quarter of what they were before, and his blood pressure is usually around 120/80. Wow, that was wonderful. Now, just so that everyone does not run out to eliminate all the salt from your diet, let me provide a caveat. A few months after we went on our salt reduction regime, we got a call from Danny's doctor, alarmed about his high potassium levels. How did that happen? Danny's dietitian pointed out that we may have gotten our sodium potassium ratio, which should be about 1 to 3 or 4, out of whack. Apparently, our body needs a certain amount of sodium to process the potassium in our systems. Oh, I didn't know that. Anyway, we eventually settled on 500 to 600 milligrams of sodium for Danny on a daily basis, assuming his potassium is around 2,000 milligrams. After we made that adjustment, his potassium returned to normal, and we did not have to take the doctor's suggestion to go on potassium reducing medication. Is it possible for a normal person to operate within society while consuming only 500 to 600 milligrams of sodium per day, or whatever low amount you may settle upon? In order to limit sodium that much, one must give up eating most Latin and Chinese foods and most soups. One cannot eat regular baked goods and cannot eat regular bread. Most restaurants are out too, because restaurant food is notoriously high in sodium as well. We have found a couple of entrees on the menu at Thai restaurants, which are low sodium and plant-based. More on the plant-based part later. Back to you. On oxalates, Danny's going to talk about.
All of us has heard of kidney stones. At least 1 in 20 individuals will have a kidney stone during his or her lifetime. The most common type of kidney stone is a calcium oxalate stone. Oxalates are naturally found in plants and animals. However, our dietitian encourages us to minimize high oxalate foods such as rhubarb, spinach, or potatoes. I also drink at least 2 quarts of water a day made with fresh lime or lemon juice and citric acid. Now, Joan, your chance to talk about plant-based diet.
As a person who likes to cook and who likes to eat, I was horrified when our dietitian suggested we began eating vegan style. The idea of eating without meat and without dairy sounded very unhealthy to me. After all, dairy is natural, and fake cheese and fake meat are not. So who would want to eat fake things instead of real ones? What soon became evident is that those look-alike vegan products were unusable anyway because of their high sodium content. So the net around our eating habits was drawn fairly tight. We were going to be eating vegetables, fruits, grains, noodles, beans, along with tofu and nutritional yeast. And that was pretty much it. Almost 2 years later, I can say that we do enjoy our food. We have not felt too deprived. Meantime, the National Kidney Foundation in the US has come out in favor of a plant-based diet for kidney disease patients. We have a drawer full of interesting grains, nuts, and beans. Varieties of noodles make the food on the plate more fun, and there are a lot more interesting vegetables out there than you would think. People in Latin America have been living on rice and beans for millennia, and that habit is actually very comforting and addictive too. Very importantly, we learned to make Danny's favorite food, ice cream, in an ice cream maker with coconut milk, which he declares quite satisfactory. There are lots of other ways things can be adapted, for example, to allow baked goods to be made without eggs. But if you do not have kidney disease, do you have to eat this way to keep the patient company? I did not like the idea of cooking twice and realized that he would have an easier time eating what he should if I did also. This has worked pretty well. When I feel compelled to have a hamburger or some shrimp, I do so when he can find another treat. There's a stash of non-vegan stuff in the house, which I can access if necessary when he is out walking the dog. Back to Danny on intermittent fasting.
Intermittent fasting is confining one's food intake to a specific period of time and then not eating anything else, that is fasting, for the remainder of that time. We got interested in this after reading a study that suggested that the cyst formation in kidney disease was reduced by intermittent fasting. I decided to confine my eating to an 8-hour period and followed by 16 hours of fasting. My BMI, that is my body mass index, when I started this plan was 26.9, putting me in the category of overweight. My weight has dropped 35 pounds and my BMI now is 21.1, which is normal weight range. I stopped eating at 6 p.m. on weekdays and 7 on weekends and started again at 10 a.m. on weekdays and 11 a.m. on weekends. I'm going to chat just a little bit about nutritional tracking. For the sake of our kidneys, we need to know several things. First, what nutrients we are trying to manage, for example, sodium or potassium, and the desirable amount of it per day. Second, we need to know how much of that nutrient is in the amount of food we are eating. And finally, we should know the total amount of that nutrient we are consuming relative to the ideal target. Several times a day, I add up the nutrients that I've eaten. It takes time and it takes dedication. I use an application called Chronometer that operates on a computer, a tablet, or a phone. The base program is free, by the way. So sometime before the third meal of the day, Joan will ask me, well, what can you eat for supper? Regardless, whether you use a computer application or a pencil, paper, and a calculator, the more you know, the better you can guard and preserve the health of your kidneys.
In conclusion, we took a hard look at Danny's kidney situation almost 2 years ago when he had high blood pressure, was overweight, mildly overweight, and had a GFR of 19%. He currently has normal blood pressure, is not overweight, and has a GFR hovering around 24%. Are those small gains worth such a drastic approach to eating? Well, they were to us. We hope some of our experience can help people who are in less extreme situations to retain their kidney function for a long time and still enjoy food and life in general. Over to you, Roxanne.
Thank you. So I will talk in French. Donc,
Hello everyone, I am a nephrology dietitian and for the last 16 years I've been working at the IUCPQ in Quebec. I work with pre-dialysis patients in stage 4 and 5. Today I'm going to talk to you about the new recommendations in terms of renal nutrition, and I'm going to provide you with a more simplified approach regarding the kidney health plate, which is more based on the quality of the foods on your plate, and we'll also talk about the new nutrition labeling that has been made mandatory on all products in Canada. So now what's new in terms of renal nutrition? So for the last few years, we've been eagerly waiting for the new guidelines because, in fact, the existing guidelines were dated back to 2000. So in 2020, we received the latest updated version. And what's interesting for you to know in terms of the recommendation linked to salt and sodium, there hasn't been any changes. So we're still seeking an intake of 2,300 milligrams per day, which is the same as the general population, where the needs are around 1,200 or 1,500 milligrams. Now, when we talk about proteins, the recommendations have slightly changed. So we now aim for a little less protein intake than before, but in all cases, Protein needs are specific to individuals and they should be assessed by your dietitian. But now the big change is linked to phosphorus and potassium. So there is no longer a recommended limit value as it was in the past. Why was the decision taken? Is that we have seen through the research in the last few years that the quantity of phosphorus and potassium in a food does not correspond necessarily to the quantity that is actually absorbed by the intestine. So the amount of phosphorus and potassium in non-processed foods such as fruits and vegetables, whole grains, legumes, and nuts contains much less potassium and phosphorus that is not absorbed in the same way by the body, has little influence on blood levels. Now we focus on reducing the intake of processed foods, food additives, and animal proteins. So now when we talk about the kidney health plate, so it's more focused on the quality of the foods on the plate. So for example, we encourage the consumption of all types of proteins, be it plant-based or not. We also encourage the intake of whole grains, and we also encourage the intake of fruits and vegetables. So you can see that this is very aligned with the new Canadian Food Guide that recommends to consume fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and that it recommends to limit the intake of processed foods. And they also reminds us that we need to read the labels, which brings me to the next point. So what's going on with this new labeling? So what's interesting to hear is that for a few years now, the law was enacted some years ago, but as of December 31st, 2021, all products need to contain this labeling. So I'd like to bring your attention to a few points to the new labeling. So one of the first things is that portions have changed. So before you might have noticed that it was difficult to compare products because on one product you'd had 2 or 3 crackers on one label, and then you had 12 crackers on another label. Or example, one portion was 2 slices versus 1 slice. So now you have reference values. So for example, we're always going to be able to compare salad dressings, which will be set at 2 labels, and cheese will be at 30 grams. So we've also included potassium on the nutrition facts. I'm going to talk to you about this a bit later on in my presentation. So at the very end, we also have a little mention is that 5% or less is a little and 50% or more is a lot. And that could help individuals very quickly determine if, for example, we see 450 milligrams, is it a lot? So it's under 15%, so we don't consider that as a lot. And lastly, we have now a percentage for sugar, and that allows us to determine how much sugar is in the product based on our needs. And in fact, WHO recommends to intake less than 50 milligrams per day. So this is why it's very important to look at the labels. And what's very important for the sugar is that companies are forced now to pool together all the sugars together and to quantify the weight. Before, you could have a cake mix, for example, that had 3 or 4 different types of sugars that were listed in different parts. And then at the beginning, you would just see flour, but now because sugars are now all pooled together, if the weight of the sugars is higher than that of the flour, it will be placed first. So this is excellent news. Now, in terms of sodium, there are different traps that we need to be aware of. So we need to make sure that the portion that we're consuming is the same as that is indicated. So for example, if we have a tendency to eat 60 grams of cheese and the portion is actually 30 grams, we need to know that actually we're consuming twice the amount of sodium. We also need to be very careful of the types of salt. So for example, pink salt, sea salt, among other types of salt. In fact, it's just salt. So they're not better salts, and all the different types of salt will have an impact on your blood pressure. And lastly, in terms of the claims, there are a few traps to keep in mind. Do not trust the claims that say, for example, low in sodium, low salt, because it doesn't necessarily mean that these products or these foods are low in sodium, so we need to make sure that we are choosing products that have less than 140 milligrams per portion, which corresponds to a low salt content. So for example, you look at these ready to serve broth. So for example, you see that if we compare it, you can see that, for example, you're talking about 630 milligrams. That's 2 packets of salt per portion. So we're way above our intake. So, for example, the no salt added is only 60 milligrams, which is at 30%, 3%, which is below that 6%. Now, let's talk about potassium. This is a new value that has been included in the nutrition facts table, but we need to be able to assess it correctly. So why is it now mandatory? It's because 90% of the Canadians do not consume enough potassium, and we know that, for example, potassium is very good for your health and also for your blood pressure. So in general, we recommend to have 2 times more potassium than sodium in our diet. However, the content that we see in the table does not take into account the absorption rates, which I mentioned earlier. So we know that, for example, in the last research that's been conducted, the potassium that we find in unprocessed foods, for example, fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, it has a low absorption rate by the intestine, and it has less impact on the blood potassium. So for example, if we see 300 milligrams of potassium in a fresh fruit that has not been processed, lastly, it's about 150 milligrams that will actually be absorbed by the body. So we're not going to have this value in the table. Potassium also in transformed vegetables, for example, my fruit is transformed into a juice, or my tomato to a sauce, the potassium will be readily absorbed by the body. And the same thing for animal-based potassium, it contains a different type of potassium that will be absorbed differently by the body. And then, for example, we'll talk about the potassium in additives, and it's 100% absorption rate, and that's something we have not talked about sufficiently. We can find this type of potassium in deli meats, and also low sodium processed foods, which can contain these type of potassium. So it's very difficult to compare products by looking only at the content. It's very important to go at the list of ingredients. So I've provided a few examples here. For example, we have we have a can of legumes. So for example, we have 300 milligrams of potassium. It's a low absorption rate, and we also see it's a good source of fiber. And then, for example, we have here some ham that includes an additive of potassium. So it has 350 milligrams of potassium that is going to be well absorbed by the body. I'm going to give you an example of a very popular product that for quick meals. So for example, you didn't have the potassium content, but now with a new label, we see now the impact that the additive can have. And we can see here that this type of products that can lead to significant increases in the amount of potassium in your blood. Now, in terms of the phosphorus is not mandatory. However, phosphorus additives must be listed in the ingredients. So, for example, if we see words like phosphate, phosphite, phosphoric, these are products that contain phosphorus, and we know that they're highly absorbed by the body. So if we compare it to our fruits and vegetables, that it actually has a lower absorption rate. We're talking about 30% of the absorption rate for nuts and fruits and vegetables. Now, we can find these additives. We can find them in all types of places, be it in breakfast foods, in drinks, in frozen meals. And so you really need to be careful. You really need to learn how to read the labels and look for those words that phosphate. So I'm going to end talking about a list of ingredients. So in the nutrition facts table provides lots of information to know the quality of a food, if it's too salty, or too sugary or has enough fiber content, but you always need to look at the list of ingredients that will be able to provide us information regarding the quality of the food. Is the list very long? Is there a lot of additives? So we always need to look at look for short and simple lists, but they'll also include natural and well-known products. So the products that we would have in our own pantry. So I would be happy to take your questions later on. And for our Francophone patients, the last book was just been published in 2021. You can find in a bookstore near you. Thank you very much.
Happy, you can go ahead and start.
Great. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Roxanne. That was great. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit today about the dialysis and nutrition. I work in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, at the St. Paul's Hospital in-center hemodialysis unit. So just a bit of an overview. We're going to start talking about why we need to follow a special diet when we're on dialysis. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the different dialysis modalities, just so you know if you are on dialysis, what you might need to do a little bit different, because not all of them are the same. We're going to go through the diet components, so protein, sodium, potassium, phosphorus, fluid, energy, calories, and then I will summarize for you. So nutrition is an important part of our treatment plan when you're at any part of kidney disease, but definitely when you're on dialysis. Your team will monitor blood work and will make decisions based on the results that we get from those. Your dietitian will work with you to make the dietary changes if they're necessary. And it's very individualized based on those blood work. And we look at other personal things such as financial, cultural aspects, and some of those things to help you make your food decisions. So just to kind of give you a basic understanding, hemodialysis, which is what I cover, there are generally quite a few restrictions needed. If you're on peritoneal dialysis, you may not need quite as many restrictions. And then if you're on home hemodialysis, you're very lucky and generally don't need many restrictions at all. So the first component of the diet would be protein. So the protein needs increase when you're on dialysis, as some is removed from the body during your dialysis treatments. I just gave you some quick examples of some of the protein sources where you might get your protein. So red meats, wild game, poultry, fish and seeds, milk and cheeses, tofu, legumes, and beans. So like Roxanne was saying, including all of those plant-based ones, as well as your meat choices. Eating the right amount is important. So we want to build muscle and repair body tissue. We want to help be able to fight infections and help healing and prevent waste from building up in our blood between treatments. Sodium is important for water balance in the body. We want to limit it to about a teaspoon of salt, or that 2,300 milligrams or less that you've heard us talk about today. And we want to limit this to help reduce fluid buildup or swelling or edema, and controlling blood pressures within normal ranges. So Roxanne's presentation was great to show us how to read those labels to help us pick out which foods are high in sodium and try to make better choices with those labels. Potassium helps keep our heart and muscles working properly. It does usually need to be restricted, but can depend on how well your kidneys are still working and some of the medications that you might be on. And portion sizes is really, really important for potassium. So we want to just remind ourselves that a large portion of a lower potassium food can turn that food into a high potassium choice. And again, just watching for those potassium additives. Potassium foods we find in all sorts of foods, and just again, some examples. So some fruits and vegetables, milk and yogurt, dried beans and peas. Salt substitutes, so those are the ones, a couple brands called half salt or no salt, where they take out the sodium and put in potassium instead. So we want to watch those. We have to watch the chocolate, nuts and seeds, and lentils and legumes potentially. Next, we have phosphorus or phosphate, and this is a mineral that works with calcium to form strong bones and teeth. It is naturally occurring in dairy products, dried beans and peas, nuts and seeds, and high fiber grains. And as Roxanne was telling us, we have those added sources found in such things as cola beverages, baking mixes, processed and marinated meats. And this is where she was talking about learning to read those food labels. I always say to look for that pH word, so whether it's phosphoric acid or something like that in the ingredient list, just to know if there is some additives in those food products or not. I always find as dietitians, we do talk quite a bit about phosphorus binder medications as we're talking to you about different foods as well. So these medications help lower phosphorus in our body. It's super important to take those right before you start eating or with the first few bites of your food to help control those phosphorus levels in the blood. Important thing to remember is to also carry those binders and remember to take them when you're eating out or maybe traveling back and forth to and from dialysis treatments. Fluid is one thing that you may have to watch as well while you're on dialysis. So if you make very little or have no urine output, the fluid you drink will stay in your body and potentially cause that swelling and edema. So generally speaking, in dialysis, intake is usually limited to about 1 liter to 1.5 liters per day, or 4 to 6 cups. And this will again depend on your 24-hour urine volume and or whether you are having any issues with swelling and edema. Generally, fluids include anything liquid at room temperature, so any beverages, so coffee, tea, milk, water, ice as well, because it will melt down to a fluid, ice cream, jello, and soup, just to name a few. Energy and calories is really important. I know sometimes patients when they're first starting dialysis feel pretty unwell and can have some trouble with food intake. So we just want to make sure we're getting enough calories from the food we eat. And we just want to make sure that we're using energy from the food we're eating instead of the protein that we have stored for muscles, because we want to be able to use that protein for muscle and tissue building and not using it for our energy to do our daily activities. And then just making sure that we have enough calories and not too many, just to stay at that healthy weight range. Just some important tips here would be to try to eat 3 meals per day or have something to eat every 4 to 6 hours, just to make sure you're taking in enough calories. And then just watching how much or little you eat and that portion control, that's so important. So summary would be just including all your food groups in a meal. So making sure you have some protein foods, some starchy foods, a fruit and vegetable, limiting those sodium fluids, high potassium, high phosphorus foods. A person's diet will differ depending on blood tests results and may change over time. So just make sure you're working with your dietitian to determine what is right for you. And they'll work with you to individualize that diet so that it works the best for you. So not everybody that's on hemodialysis needs exactly the same diet. So we always want to make it work the best for you. And then just always check out the Kidney Foundation's nutrition resources. They have the Kidney Community Kitchen as well, with some recipes and things on their website. So make sure you check that out as well. Thank you so much. Linda, over to you.
Thank you, Poppy. That was great. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Linda Cerullo. I'm a dietitian at the University Health Network in Toronto. Today, I'll be discussing the role of nutrition and a kidney transplant. Today's presentation will include a discussion about nutrition when preparing for your kidney transplant. We'll focus on things like short-term and long-term nutritional goals, as well as some food safety and natural health product concerns that may arise after you've received a kidney transplant. So why is nutrition so important when receiving a kidney transplant or when preparing to have a kidney transplant? As we discussed today, the kidney-friendly diet focuses on things like the sodium, the potassium, the nutrients such as protein, calories, fluid, and phosphorus. Following this diet will help you prevent a buildup of these nutrients in your body and will help keep you in best shape in receiving a surgery in order to receive your kidney transplant. By keeping yourself as healthy as possible, you're going to keep your new kidney as healthy as possible as well. Your renal dietitian is going to be your expert or your person to kind of go to help get you to the next step of when you're preparing for your transplant. One of the key questions that I receive from many patients is, so how is my diet going to change after I receive this transplant? There are some short-term and some long-term goals that we tend to focus upon. Short-term is usually typically between the first 6 to 8 weeks after you've received your transplant. And this goal is focusing on things called recovery. So recovering from surgery and in terms of trying to get some of your strength back as well. One of the means of getting that to achieving that is by increasing your protein and energy needs or your calorie intake. This is done by increasing, we typically allow for a larger amount of protein intake for things like the chicken, the beef, the dairy products, nuts and seeds and legumes that were discussed in other presentations as well today. An increase in protein will also help with the healing process and prevent any muscle loss that may have occurred before or after the surgery. We also recommend patients to begin liberalizing their diets in comparison to what previous restrictions they may have been following. Depending on a patient's blood work, patients may start beginning to liberalize some of the potassium in their diet. So having foods like your bananas, your oranges, your tomatoes again, those are maybe things to consider. Also, patients tend to have a significant drop in phosphorus levels post-transplant to the point where patients actually require a phosphate supplement after transplant. So we're introducing things that are higher in phosphorus, such as your dairy products, your nuts and seeds, and your legumes. This will help increase your phosphorus intake without the need of binders anymore. Another benefit of this diet is increasing your fluid intake. So for many of you who have been on a fluid restriction for so long, this type of restriction seems surreal. Many patients actually tend to come back to hospital because they are dehydrated. The new kidney wants lots and lots and lots of fluid, and your renal dietitian will be able to direct you to figure out what is the right amount for you. So once you've recovered from surgery, keeping your kidney as healthy as possible becomes the next goal and the next phase of this process. This will help decrease your risk of developing any new chronic diseases or additional chronic diseases that may occur because of medication side effects, and also due to the new liberalization of diets and changes in dietary patterns. A critical way to keep your kidney as healthy as possible is by limiting your salt intake, which Roxanne and Poppy have demonstrated quite well throughout this session as well. This actually seems quite easy for patients to do. Many patients have told me this is probably one of their easiest tasks because of the fact that they've been following a low salt diet for so long, and the foods that they really used to love they now find them to be very, very salty. So patients are quite willing to continue with this lower salt recommendation throughout their post-kidney transplant as well. The main reason why we want to limit our salt intake is because of blood pressure control. Higher blood pressure can damage our new kidney, which is obviously something that we want to try to keep as healthy as possible. Sticking with the 1 teaspoon a day of salt per day is also something to consider as the general recommendation for patients with or without kidney disease. As discussed, most sodium in our diets come from things like prepackaged foods, processed foods, including deli meats, sauces, soups, or snack foods. Reading the food labels, which is highlighted nicely within the other two presentations as well, looking for that word sodium becomes a great helpful strategy. Flavoring your foods with different types of salt alternatives, so such things as herbs, lemon, garlic, those are all types and some other options would be a good option to start to help decrease the salt intake as well, and cooking from home more often as opposed to a lot of the excess store-bought items that have a lot of hidden salts as well. So keeping your salt intake as low as possible will help you keep your new kidney functioning at its best. Another way to keep your kidney healthy is by decreasing your protein intake. So in the initial phase, we actually want you to increase your protein intake because we want to promote the healing process as much as possible. And after around the 8-week mark, we actually recommend to decrease the protein intake to about a moderate level. And one way we can figure out what that kind of looks like or help make some food choices is by following the Health Canada's plate model. This plate model becomes the most ideal to figuring out what to eat and what kind of portions to kind of eat. It has great emphasis on things like fruits and vegetables more often. It's actually half of the plate in terms, and then also choosing things like the whole grains and the complex carbohydrates, and focusing on leaner cuts of meat and meat alternatives more often. It also focuses on healthy fats, limiting those higher fat foods, baked goods, and added sugars as often as you can. And of course, water becomes the choice, the beverage of choice. And since the kidney likes a lot more fluid, that's one option to consider to increasing your fluid intake. Following these recommendations will help decrease the risk of the chronic diseases such as the diabetes, higher blood pressure, high cholesterol, and other cardiovascular diseases that may occur, and allow you to maintain a healthier weight. Another diet that is actually very popular and studied specifically for kidney transplantations is known as the Mediterranean diet. There was a bit of phase in terms of a lot of patients following this diet, probably about 5-6 years ago. I know when people started to catch on to it a lot more. This diet is a little bit more specific compared to the Health Canada plate model. And as it chooses higher intakes of the fruits and vegetables, the whole grains, the nuts and seeds, olive oil, and choosing fish more often. It also includes to limit things like meat and sweets to become less often choices. It also includes alcohol in moderation, which for those patients who do consume alcohol and would like to, it's a common question that I receive after transplant. We usually recommend it after the 8-week mark, just because of the fact that we allow for the kidney to get used to your new medications and being inside a new body kind of thing, and your body getting used to everything that's happening. And then we allow alcohol in moderation or similar guidelines to the general population. With your new kidney comes many new different medications that are you required to help suppress your immune system and keep your kidney safe. Unfortunately, these medications also have many side effects, including unintended weight gain, things like diabetes, and other cardiovascular risks such as higher blood pressures. A key medication that patients who receive a kidney transplant are on is known as prednisone. Prednisone tends to increase your appetite and impair blood glucose levels. These side effects, coupled with dietary changes or changes to dietary patterns, may increase the risk of developing chronic diseases. Thus, it becomes even more important to have nutrition at the forefront when following following a healthy diet as well. Another risk that may occur with immunosuppressive medications or being immunocompromised due to the medications is risk of foodborne illnesses. So foods that you may have enjoyed previously are things that perhaps may not be tolerated afterwards. So things to avoid are things like undercooked meats, fish, and eggs. These items would have to be fully cooked. Unpasteurized items as well are something that we typically not recommend. And remembering to keep your foods stored properly within the fridge or freezer and not out for too long. This will also help avoid things like foodborne illness as much as possible. By avoiding foodborne illnesses, you're decreasing your risk of any infection and keeping you as healthy as possible. Finally, the use of natural health products becomes a very hot topic for someone who receives a new kidney. I find it interesting that patients that all of a sudden want to follow or have a natural health product after they receive a kidney, and they've never been on them before, but they may have heard from so-and-so that told them that they had to start trying to have items that they help keep their kidney functioning at its best. We typically recommend not to start these products, and we ask you to chat with your transplant team prior to starting these products, because there isn't sufficient evidence to see what the harms or benefits of these products are, and they tend to actually interact with a lot of the immunosuppressive medications. By avoiding this process, you'll decrease your risk for any of the interactions, and it actually keeps the immunosuppressive medications where they need to be. So this isn't one of the things, but you ask you to actually talk to your transplant team as much as possible for this. So in conclusion, nutrition plays a key role in managing all stages of kidney disease and transplant. After the recovery phase, by focusing on a balanced diet, is key to help keep your kidney healthy and reducing the risk of chronic diseases. The two main diets that I focused on were things like the healthy plate model and the Mediterranean diet, focusing on the vegetables, the legumes, and the higher fiber fruits, and keeping a moderate protein intake become beneficial in this stage of kidney disease. Limiting the excess salt, the saturated fat, and the added sugar, similar to what we discussed throughout the session today, are also becomes beneficial. And being mindful of your food safety and natural health products consumption as well. And it will just allow you to be as healthy as possible, and to keeping that new kidney, increasing the longevity of that new kidney as well. And always speaking to your kidney dietitian, renal dietitian, to if you have any questions specifically for this. So Rosanna, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you to all for sharing these helpful tips and tools. Nutrition for kidney patients can be challenging to manage. As chronic kidney disease progresses, nutritional needs change. I know you all have a lot of questions, which you can still submit your questions for presenters by typing them into the Q&A pane found in the bottom toolbar of your Zoom screen at the bottom of the meeting window. Remember to avoid using the chat box to submit your questions. It helps us monitor them more effectively when they are all submitted in the Q&A pane. Feel free to submit your question in either English or French, and please note that we are unable to provide medical advice for specific issues. There are already a few questions submitted, which I will go ahead and ask now. This question may be directed to you, Roxanne. When looking at labels for items expressed as a % of daily value, what is that daily value based on?
So the daily value varies from one product to the next. I would like to tell you that it represents the daily needs, but it's not the case. So for example, the daily value for sodium is 2,300 milligrams, which corresponds to the maximum limit. So that means we don't want to consume 2,300 milligrams. For example, for sugar, the daily value is at 100 grams. However, the WHO recommends to consume less than 50 grams. So again, we never want to be consuming 100% of the recommended daily value. So for example, potassium, we're talking about 4,700 milligrams, which is a recommended intake for Canadians. And for phosphorus, what's interesting, they set the daily value at 1,250 milligrams, while the daily needs at 700 milligrams. So again, or in other words, an indication, but it's not necessarily a percentage that we want to consume. So it's important to understand our personal targets. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we have a question for Danny and Joan. When you change your diet and introduce the fasting process, can you speak to any emotional changes that may have been associated with such a drastic change?
Joan, you want to speak to that? Or no? I sense no emotional change. I felt very, I didn't, maybe got hungry a little bit, but in the fasting period, but other than that, no change in emotion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Is sparkling water considered the same as regular water? I'll leave it open to our dietitians for that answer.
There are different types of sparkling water. We can have sparkling water that it only contains carbonated water, while other types of sparkling waters will have lots of minerals. Some can be very good for the kidneys. For example, sparkling waters that are very high or rich in bicarbonate, but others can be very salty. And other flavored waters can include additives, including potassium and phosphorus. So you need to really look at the ingredients that make up the water.
Thank you so much. We do have time for one more quick question. With so many milk substitutes out now, such as lactose-free and oat milk, are they better than regular dairy to lower phosphorus or potassium?
For now, so almond and oat milk contains that phosphorus additive, so you need to be careful. Companies are using trisodium phosphate in their plant-based drinks, so while they might not contain phosphorus, and if it's supplemented with B12, such as milk, it could be a great substitute, but you need to read the list of ingredients.
Thank you. So we are getting near the end of our session. So I would just like to say thank you to Danny and Joan, Roxanne, Poppy, and Linda for sharing such helpful information.